She sat perfectly still in the corner of the community center, her hands folded precisely in her lap, watching as one by one, every potential suitor walked away after barely 5 minutes of conversation. The matchmaking event was supposed to be her chance at love, her family's last desperate attempt to find someone who could accept their autistic daughter. But as the evening wore on and the rejection became a pattern, even the most optimistic hearts in the room began to sink. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. That's when Marcus Thompson, a weary single father of 2, noticed something everyone else had missed while others saw her differences as obstacles. He saw them as the very qualities that could heal his broken family. What happened next didn't just change 2 lives. It transformed an entire community's understanding of what perfect love really looks like. The fluorescent lights of the Riverside Community Center buzzed with the kind of harsh persistence that made everything underneath them look slightly unreal. Tables draped in cheerful yellow cloths were arranged in neat rows, each one set with 2 chairs facing each other like an interrogation setup disguised as romance. This was the 3rd annual Hearts Connect matchmaking event, organized by the well-meaning ladies of St. Catherine's Parish, and by all accounts, it should have been a success. The registration list was full, the refreshments were plentiful, and hope hung in the air like expensive perfume. But in the far corner, at table number 12, hope was dying a slow and public death. Sarah Chen sat with her spine perfectly straight, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail that hadn't shifted even slightly in the 3 hours since the event began. Her hands remained folded in exactly the same position they'd been in when she first sat down, fingers interlaced, thumbs aligned. She wore a simple blue cardigan over a white blouse, clothes her mother had chosen because they were approachable but not too casual, and black flats that didn't make any sound when she walked. Everything about her appearance had been carefully calculated to make the best first impression possible. The problem wasn't how she looked. Sarah was 26 years old with kind eyes and a gentle smile that appeared when she felt safe enough to let it. The problem was what happened when people tried to talk to her. "So Sarah," the current man across from her was saying, his voice carrying the forced cheerfulness of someone who'd already decided this wasn't going to work out. "Tell me about your hobbies." Sarah's eyes moved to a spot just over his left shoulder, not quite making eye contact, but close enough to appear polite. She took exactly 3 seconds before responding, as her social skills coach had taught her. "I collect vintage postcards from the 1940s. I have 473 of them, organized by year and then by state of origin. The most interesting one is from a soldier in Belgium who wrote to his sweetheart about the way snow looked on Christmas. Even 1944. He used the word pristine 3 times in one paragraph, which suggests either limited vocabulary or very precise emotional expression." The man blinked. "Oh, that's specific." "Yes," Sarah agreed, not recognizing the subtle criticism in his tone. "Specificity is important for accurate categorization." He glanced at his watch, a gesture Sarah noticed immediately. She'd seen that same gesture 7 times tonight, from 7 different men, always followed by the same polite but firm conclusion. "Well, Sarah, it's been lovely talking with you, but I think I'm going to—" He stood up, already scanning the room for someone else, someone easier. "Good luck with everything." And just like that, he was gone, leaving Sarah alone at table 12 once again. Across the room, her mother Linda Chen stood near the punch bowl, gripping a paper cup so tightly it was beginning to crumple. She'd been watching every interaction with the intensity of a scientist observing a critical experiment, and the results were becoming painfully clear. This wasn't working. None of it was working. "Maybe we should call it a night," her husband, David, murmured, appearing beside her with the careful movements of someone who'd spent years learning how to approach his wife when she was on the edge of panic. No, Linda whispered, her voice sharp with desperation. She's been looking forward to this for weeks. She practiced conversations in the mirror. She learned 30 different ways to ask follow-up questions. We can't just give up. David followed. His wife's gaze to their daughter, who was now arranging the salt and pepper shakers on her table in a precise pattern, a small comfort behavior she developed as a child. Honey, look at her. She's overwhelmed. And these men. He shook his head. They don't understand. They don't even try to understand. Linda's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She deserves love, David. She deserves someone who sees how incredible she is. She remembers everything anyone has ever told her. She notices details that would make you weep. She loves with a purity that most people don't even know exists. But all they see is different, David finished quietly. The truth hung between them like a weight. Sarah was autistic, diagnosed at age 4 when her rigid routines and intense interests had finally been recognized as something more complex than mere stubbornness. For 22 years, her parents had worked tirelessly to help her navigate a world that seemed designed for everyone but her. They'd found schools that understood her learning style, therapists who appreciated her unique perspective, and communities where her differences were seen as strengths rather than deficits. But love, romance, partnership, those had remained frustratingly elusive. It wasn't that Sarah didn't want those things. She talked about them often, in her precise and thoughtful way. She'd read every romance novel in the local library, memorizing the patterns of courtship and the language of affection. She'd studied dating advice websites with the same intensity she brought to her postcard collection, creating detailed charts about conversation starters and appropriate physical boundaries. She wanted love desperately, but she wanted it on terms that made sense to her orderly mind. The world, unfortunately, didn't seem interested in accommodating those terms. I think, Linda said slowly, maybe we were wrong to try this. Maybe. We should have known that a cattle call like this wouldn't work for her. But even as she spoke, something was happening across the room that would change everything. Marcus Thompson hadn't intended to come to the matchmaking event at all. He'd been driving past the community center on his way home from a double shift at the auto repair shop where he worked as a mechanic, his mind focused on nothing more complex than whether he had enough energy to make dinner for his kids, or if it was going to be another cereal for dinner night. The parking lot was unusually full for a Tuesday evening, and curiosity had gotten the better of him. "What's going on in there?" He'd asked the woman smoking a cigarette near the entrance. "Some kind of speed dating thing," she'd replied with a shrug. "My sister dragged me here and then ditched me for some guy who works in insurance." Disaster all around. Marcus should have gotten back in his truck and driven home. He should have picked up his 8-year-old daughter Emma and 12-year-old son Jake from his neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez, helped them with homework, and fallen asleep on the couch watching whatever movie they'd picked out. He should have stuck to his routine, the careful structure he'd built around his life after his wife Rachel's death 3 years ago. Instead, something pulled him toward the doors of the community center. Maybe it was loneliness, though Marcus rarely admitted to feeling that. Maybe it was curiosity about what it would be like to talk to another adult about something other than carburetor repairs or parent-teacher conferences. Maybe it was the desperate hope that somewhere in that room full of strangers, there might be someone who could understand what it was like to rebuild a life from scratch. Or maybe it was simply timing, the universe's way of putting two people in the same place at exactly the moment they needed to find each other. Marcus stood in the doorway for a full minute, taking in the scene. Round tables, nervous laughter. The kind of forced social interaction that made his skin crawl. He was about to turn around and leave when his eyes landed on table number 12. The woman sitting there was beautiful, but that wasn't what stopped him. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It was the way she sat, perfectly still and composed while chaos swirled around her. It was the careful precision of her posture, the way her hands remained folded despite the obvious stress of the situation. And most of all, it was the fact that she was completely alone while every other table buzzed with conversation. Marcus understood what it felt like to be isolated in a crowd. He watched as another man approached her table, sat down, and within minutes made his excuses and left. He saw the woman's shoulders tense almost imperceptibly, saw her reach for the salt shaker and adjust its position by perhaps an inch. And something in those small, careful movements reminded him powerfully of his daughter Emma, who arranged her toys in specific patterns when she was upset and couldn't articulate why. Without quite deciding to do it, Marcus found himself walking across the room. Sarah was in the middle of realigning the condiment containers when a shadow fell across her table. She looked up, expecting to see another reluctant volunteer from the dwindling pool of available men, and instead found herself face to face with someone who looked as out of place as she felt. He was tall and broad-shouldered in the way of men, who worked with their hands, wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt that was obviously his version of dressing up. His dark hair was slightly messed from running his fingers through it, and there were motor oil stains under his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing had been able to remove. He looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that came from carrying too much responsibility for too long. But his eyes were kind. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, and his voice carried a gentleness that made Sarah look directly at him for the first time all evening. "Table 12 is designated for matchmaking." "Conversations," Sarah replied, because precision in language had always been important to her. "Are you here for matchmaking purposes?" The corner of his mouth twitched upward. "I guess I am now. I'm Marcus." "Sarah," she replied, and because her social coach had drilled this into her, she added, "It's nice to meet you, Marcus." He settled into the chair across from her with the easy movements of someone comfortable in his own skin. "So how's your night going?" It was a simple question, the kind most people would answer with a polite fine regardless of the truth. But Sarah had never learned the art of social lies. "Poorly," she said matter-of-factly. 8 men have spoken with me tonight, and the average conversation length has been 4 minutes and 37 seconds. The shortest was 2 minutes and 12 seconds, and the longest was 7 minutes and 41 seconds. But that was only because the gentleman was having difficulty extricating himself from the conversation. Marcus stared at her for a moment, and Sarah braced herself for the familiar look of bewilderment followed by polite retreat. Instead, he laughed. Not a mocking laugh, but something warm and genuine. "You've been timing them?" "Time is objective," Sarah explained. "It provides useful data about social interactions. For instance, I can now definitively state that my conversational approach is statistically unsuccessful in this environment." "Maybe," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, "the problem isn't your approach. Maybe the problem is them." Sarah blinked. In all her social skills training, no one had ever suggested that the failure might lie with the other person. "I don't understand." "Well, you seem pretty interesting to me." Anyone who keeps track of conversation times probably notices a lot of things other people miss. "That could be useful." "Useful how?" Marcus considered this. "My daughter Emma, she's 8. She notices everything too. Like, she can tell you exactly how many steps it takes to get from our front door to the mailbox, and she knows which neighbor's dog barks at what time of day. Most adults think that's weird, but I think it's amazing. She sees the world in a way I never could." Something loosened in Sarah's chest. Pattern recognition and attention to detail are cognitive strengths often found in individuals with autism spectrum disorders. "You're autistic?" The question came without judgment, which was so unusual that Sarah found herself answering honestly instead of deflecting. "Yes, high-functioning autism, though many people prefer the term autism with lower support needs now. I was diagnosed at age 4. That must have been hard sometimes. Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of pity or discomfort, but found only genuine interest. Some aspects of neurotypical social interaction are challenging for me, she admitted. But autism also provides certain advantages. Enhanced pattern recognition, strong attention to detail, above-average memory retention, and deep focus on subjects of interest. What are you interested in? Currently? Vintage postcards from the 1940s, the migration patterns of monarch, butterflies, and the mathematical principles underlying the golden ratio as it appears in natural formations. Marcus nodded as if this were the most normal thing in the world. The golden ratio thing sounds fascinating. I've never really understood math beyond what I need for work, but Emma's always been good with numbers. Maybe you could explain it. Sometime. You have a daughter, Sarah said, because she'd been taught to ask follow-up questions about information people shared. Emma, yeah. And a son, Jake. He's 12. Marcus paused, and for the first time he looked uncertain. I should probably mention that up front. I'm a single dad. Their mom died 3 years ago. I'm sorry for your loss, Sarah said, because this was the appropriate response to disclosure of bereavement. Thank you. Marcus was quiet for a moment. It's been just the three of us since then. We're still figuring it out. Grief is a complex psychological process, Sarah observed. There's no standard timeline for recovery, despite what many people believe. No, there isn't, Marcus agreed softly. Some days are better than others. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and Sarah realized something remarkable. She wasn't watching the clock. For the first time all evening, she wasn't counting seconds or monitoring conversation length. She was simply present in the moment, talking to someone who didn't seem to find her responses strange or off-putting. Can I ask you something? Marcus said eventually. Yes. Why are you here? I mean, you seem like you've got your life pretty well figured out. Smart, interesting, clearly successful at whatever you do. Why come to a matchmaking event? Sarah considered the question carefully. Honesty had always been important to her, even when it wasn't socially advantageous. I want to experience romantic love and partnership, she said finally. I've read extensively about both concepts, and they appear to provide significant emotional and practical benefits. Additionally, my parents are concerned about my future care and believe that marriage would provide stability and companionship. That's very practical, Marcus said, and there was no sarcasm in his voice. Practicality is important. But I also... Sarah hesitated, then pushed forward. I also believe I have a great deal to offer a potential partner. I'm reliable, loyal, and committed to continuous improvement. I have financial stability through my work as a data analyst, and I maintain a clean and organized living environment. I would be devoted to a family and would never take that commitment lightly. Marcus felt something shift in his chest as he listened to her. There was something both heartbreaking and wonderful about the way she described herself like a job candidate, listing qualifications instead of talking about dreams or feelings. And yet, underneath the clinical language, he could hear the yearning of someone who wanted desperately to be chosen, to be seen as worthy of love. What kind of partner are you looking for? He asked. Someone who appreciates directness over social subtext. Sarah replied immediately, as if she'd prepared for this question. Someone who understands that love can be expressed through actions, rather than just words. Someone who values consistency and doesn't require constant social stimulation. And someone who wouldn't try to change my fundamental nature, but might help me navigate situations where my approach isn't effective. Marcus found himself nodding. That sounds reasonable. Previous potential partners have indicated that. My expectations are too specific or that I'm too rigid in my thinking. Maybe you just haven't met the right person yet. Sarah looked at him directly for the first time, really looked at him, and Marcus felt the full force of her attention. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, and there was an intensity to her gaze that was both unsettling and compelling. "You're different from the other men who've spoken with me tonight," she observed. "How so?" "You're not trying to make me laugh. You're not asking about my hobbies as if they're amusing quirks. You're not checking your watch or looking around. The room for someone more suitable. You're actually listening to what I'm saying. Should I be doing those other things?" "No," Sarah said quickly. "I prefer this." And there it was, the moment when everything shifted. Neither of them recognized it as such at the time. It felt too simple, too quiet to be the beginning of something life-changing. But in that admission, in Sarah's quiet declaration of preference and Marcus's willingness to simply be present with her without trying to fix or change anything, something new began to grow. Across the room, Linda Chen had been watching their table with growing amazement. Her daughter had been talking to the same man for 23 minutes, and neither of them had shown any signs of wanting to leave. More importantly, Sarah looked relaxed in a way Linda hadn't seen in months. "David," she whispered, grabbing her husband's arm. "Look." David followed her gaze and felt his own surge of cautious hope. Sarah was leaning forward slightly, engaged in what appeared to be serious conversation with a man who seemed genuinely interested in what she was saying. "Should we?" David began. "No," Linda said firmly. "We don't interfere, we just watch." Back at table 12, Marcus was discovering that talking to Sarah was unlike any conversation he'd had in years. There was no subtext to decode, no hidden meanings to puzzle out. When she said something, she meant exactly what she said. When she asked a question, she genuinely wanted to know the answer. It was refreshing in a way he hadn't expected. "Tell me about your children," Sarah said, because she'd noticed that his entire demeanor changed when he mentioned them. "Emma's 8, like I said. She's—" Marcus paused, considering how to explain his daughter. "She's special. Really smart. But in ways that don't always show up on tests. She knows everything about dinosaurs, and I mean everything. She can tell you what each one ate and where they lived and how their bone structure worked. But she has trouble making friends because she'd rather talk about fossils than whatever kids her age are supposed to be interested in." Sarah felt a flutter of recognition. "She sounds remarkable. She is. She's also really sensitive to loud noises and doesn't like it when people touch her without warning. Some of the other parents think she's weird, but I think she's perfect exactly as she is." "And your son?" "Jake's different, more social, better at reading people. He's been trying to take care of Emma and me since Rachel died, which is too much responsibility for a 12-year-old, but I can't seem to convince him to just be a kid." Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "I worry I'm screwing them both up. Single parenting wasn't exactly something I trained for. Parenting in general seems to lack adequate preparation protocols," Sarah observed. "Most people appear to improvise based on their own childhood experiences and hope for the best." That's terrifyingly accurate. They talked for another 10 minutes about children and work and the strange social dynamics of community events. Sarah found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't experienced with another adult in years, and Marcus discovered that he was genuinely enjoying himself for the first time since Rachel's funeral. It might have continued indefinitely, but the evening was winding down around them. Other couples were saying their goodbyes, volunteers were beginning to clean up, and the overhead lights seemed even harsher as the crowd thinned. "I should probably go," Marcus said reluctantly. "I need to pick up the kids from my neighbors." "Of course," Sarah replied, though something in her expression suggested disappointment. Marcus stood up, then hesitated. "Sarah, would you like to have coffee sometime? I mean, if you're interested in continuing this conversation." Sarah blinked at him. "You want to see me again?" "Yeah, I do. You're interesting and honest, and you've made me think about things differently tonight. Plus, I'd love to hear more about that golden ratio thing." For a moment, Sarah looked stunned, as if she couldn't quite process what was happening. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. It transformed her features completely, making her look younger and lighter and absolutely radiant. "I would like that very much," she said. "I know a coffee shop that's usually quiet in the mornings, if noise level is a consideration." "Noise level is definitely a consideration," Marcus replied, thinking of Emma's sensitivities. "Saturday morning work for you?" "Saturday morning is excellent. I'll give you my contact information." As they exchanged phone numbers and made plans, neither of them noticed the small crowd that had gathered near the punch bowl. Word had spread through the remaining attendees that something special was happening at table 12, and people were watching with the kind of fascination usually reserved for rare natural phenomena. "Did you see that?" one woman whispered to her friend. She actually smiled. "I've been watching her all night, and she barely made eye contact with anyone else." "He's good with her," another observer noted. "He doesn't seem bothered by how direct." "She is." Linda Chen stood at the edge of the group, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter experience what might be her first genuine romantic connection. David wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "She deserves this," Linda whispered. "She deserves someone who sees how wonderful she is." "Maybe she found him," David replied softly. As Marcus and Sarah said their goodbyes and prepared to leave, neither of them had any idea that they'd just participated in what would become legendary in the small social circles of Riverside. The story of the autistic woman and the single father who found each other at a matchmaking event would be told and retold, growing in the telling until it became something approaching folklore. But that night, there were just two people who'd managed to find a moment of genuine connection in a world that seemed designed to keep them apart. As Sarah walked to her car with her parents and Marcus headed home to his children, both of them carried the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd found something worth pursuing. Neither of them could have predicted that this first tentative step would lead to a love story that would challenge everything their community thought they knew about autism, family, and what it means to be a perfect match. The real journey was just beginning. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Sarah Chen had been awake since 5:30, not because she was nervous, but because her internal clock operated with mechanical precision, regardless of emotional circumstances. She'd spent 47 minutes selecting her outfit, not out of vanity, but from a genuine desire to communicate respect for the occasion. She settled on dark jeans, a soft green sweater that didn't trigger her texture sensitivities, and comfortable walking shoes in case Marcus wanted to explore beyond the coffee shop. The Quiet Bean was exactly what its name suggested, a small establishment tucked between a used bookstore and a flower shop on Maple Street. Sarah had discovered it 2 years ago during one of her systematic explorations of downtown Riverside, cataloging every business within walking distance of her apartment. The owner, Mrs. Patterson, understood the value of consistency and had never once rearranged the furniture or changed the background music volume without warning her regular customers first. Sarah arrived at precisely 9 o'clock as agreed, and chose the corner table farthest from the espresso machine. She ordered her usual chamomile tea with honey, no milk, and arranged her napkin, car keys, and phone in their designated positions on the table. Then she waited, watching the door, with the focused attention she brought to everything that mattered to her. Marcus pulled into the parking lot at 9:03, having dropped Emma and Jake at his mother's house with strict instructions that they were to behave themselves and not interrogate him too thoroughly when he returned. He'd changed clothes 3 times that morning, a level of indecision that hadn't plagued him since high school. Nothing in his wardrobe felt right for coffee with a woman who noticed everything and appreciated honesty above social conventions. He'd finally settled on clean jeans and a navy sweater that Rachel had bought him years ago, telling himself that if Sarah was as straightforward as she seemed, She'd care more about punctuality than fashion choices. Still, he found himself checking his appearance in the rearview mirror before walking into the coffee shop, running his fingers through hair that refused to cooperate despite his best efforts. The moment he stepped inside, Marcus spotted Sarah at her corner table, sitting with perfect posture and hands folded in the same precise way he remembered from the community center. She looked up as the door chimed, and her face brightened with what appeared to be genuine pleasure at seeing him. "You're 3 minutes late," she observed as he approached her table. Marcus felt a brief flash of panic before he caught the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth. "Is that a problem?" "No. 3 minutes falls within acceptable parameters for social punctuality. I was simply making an observation." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Would you like to sit down? That's generally why people meet." "For coffee," Marcus replied, settling into the offered seat. True, though statistical analysis suggests that approximately 37% of coffee meetings are actually pretexts for other activities or conversations that the participants find difficult to initiate directly. Marcus paused in the act of shrugging off his jacket. "Have you been researching coffee date statistics?" "I researched optimal first date protocols," Sarah admitted without embarrassment. Multiple sources indicated that coffee meetings provide low-pressure environments for extended conversation, while maintaining easy exit strategies for both parties if compatibility proves insufficient. "Very practical," Marcus said, and he meant it. There was something refreshing about talking to someone who approached dating with the same methodical care most people reserve for major purchases. "Would you like me to order for you?" Sarah asked. "I've observed the ordering patterns of other customers and can provide recommendations based on your apparent preferences." "You've been analyzing customer preferences?" "I notice patterns. It's automatic." Sarah looked slightly self-conscious for the first time. "I realize that many people find such observations intrusive or unusual." "I don't," Marcus said quickly. "Actually, it sounds useful." "What did you figure out about me?" Sarah's eyes lit up with interest. "Based on your clothing choices, work-related calluses, and the fact that you arrived in a 10-year-old pickup truck that's been well-maintained, but not pampered, I would estimate you prefer practical choices over luxury items. You probably drink regular coffee, black or with minimal additions, and you're more concerned with caffeine content than flavor complexity." Marcus stared at her for a moment, then laughed. "That's remarkably accurate." "How? Did you know about the truck maintenance? Clean exterior despite obvious age, new tires that don't match the vehicle's original specifications, and the sound of the engine when you parked suggests recent tune-up work. You take care of your possessions because replacement isn't always financially convenient, but you don't invest in upgrades unless they serve a functional purpose." "You got all that from hearing me park?" "I have enhanced auditory processing. I can distinguish between different engine sounds and identify mechanical issues that most people wouldn't notice." Sarah paused. "Is that strange?" "It's amazing," Marcus said sincerely. "I work on cars for a living, and it takes me listening for several minutes to diagnose some of the things you picked up in seconds." Something relaxed in Sarah's posture. She'd spent so many years having her heightened sensory awareness dismissed as overthinking or criticized as obsessive that Marcus's appreciation felt like discovering a new language she'd always wanted to speak. "I'll get us coffee," Marcus said, standing up. "Large black coffee for me, and what would you like?" "I already have tea," Sarah said, indicating her barely touched cup. "But thank you for offering." As Marcus waited in line, he found himself studying Sarah through the reflection in the glass pastry case. She sat perfectly still, except for the slight movement of her fingers against her teacup, a gesture so subtle he might have missed it if he wasn't paying attention. There was something almost meditative about her stillness, as if she existed in a pocket of calm that extended just far enough to encompass her immediate space. First date? Asked Mrs. Patterson from behind the counter, following his gaze. Yeah, well, sort of. I'm not sure what to call it. She's a lovely girl. Very polite, always tips exactly 15%, never asks for modifications to her order. Some of my other customers find her a bit intense, but I think she's just particular about what she likes. Marcus nodded, collecting his coffee and a blueberry muffin he hadn't planned to buy. She is particular. I like that about her. When he returned to the table, Sarah was studying something on her phone with the focused attention of a researcher examining critical data. Work emergency? Marcus asked, settling back into his chair. Monarch butterfly migration update, Sarah replied without looking up. There's been an unusual weather pattern affecting their route through Texas, and I've been tracking the adjustments in their flight path. You follow butterfly migration patterns? Among other things. The monarch migration is one of the most remarkable navigation feats in the natural world. Individual butterflies travel up to 3,000 miles using a combination of environmental cues and genetic programming, despite having a brain smaller than a pinhead. Marcus took a sip of his coffee, which was strong enough to strip paint and exactly what he needed. That's incredible. I never really thought about butterflies being navigators. Most people don't. But their ability to process and respond to multiple environmental variables simultaneously while maintaining course toward a destination they've never seen represents a level of biological engineering that surpasses most human technological achievements. The enthusiasm in Sarah's voice was unmistakable, and Marcus found himself leaning forward, genuinely interested. How do they do it? For the next 20 minutes, Sarah explained the intricacies of monarch navigation with the passion of someone sharing their deepest fascination. She talked about magnetic field detection, sun compass orientation, and the genetic mystery of multi-generational migration patterns. Marcus listened, asking questions that demonstrated he was following her explanations rather than simply being polite. I'm sorry, Sarah said suddenly, stopping mid-sentence. I'm doing it again. Doing what? Monologuing about my special interests. My social skills coach says it's one of my most problematic behaviors in conversational settings. Marcus felt a flash of irritation at this unknown coach. Why is it problematic? Because most people find extended discussions of specialized topics boring or overwhelming. The generally accepted protocol is to gauge the other person's interest level and adjust accordingly. Have you gauged my interest level? Sarah looked at him carefully, as if trying to solve a complex equation. You've maintained eye contact, asked follow-up questions, and your body language suggests engagement rather than politeness. But people are often skilled at masking disinterest. Sarah, Marcus said gently, I'm not masking anything. What you're telling me is fascinating. I had no idea butterflies were so complex. Really? Really. In fact, I'm wondering if Emma might like to learn about this. She's always been interested in animals, and the navigation stuff sounds like something she'd want to understand. Sarah's face lit up with an expression Marcus was beginning to recognize as her version of excitement. I have several children's books about monarch migration. And there's a butterfly garden at the Nature Center that's specifically designed to support migrating populations. If she's interested in experiential learning rather than just theoretical knowledge, she'd love that. Emma learns better when she can see and touch things rather than just reading about them. Kinesthetic learner, Sarah nodded. Many children with high intelligence process information more effectively through hands-on experiences. Marcus paused with his coffee cup halfway to his lips. Children with high intelligence. You mentioned that Emma is very smart, but that her intelligence doesn't always show up on standardized tests. That pattern often indicates giftedness combined with alternative learning styles. Has she been evaluated for advanced academic programs? No, Marcus said slowly. Her teachers keep saying she's bright but unfocused. They want her to pay more attention to group activities and less attention to whatever she's fixated on that week. Sarah's expression shifted, becoming more serious. May I ask what kinds of things Emma fixates on? Dinosaurs mainly, but also rocks, and last month she spent 2 weeks learning everything she could about how bridges work. She'd talk about whatever it is for hours if you let her, but she gets frustrated when other kids don't want to hear about it. How does she respond to changes in routine or unexpected events? Marcus set down his coffee, suddenly understanding the direction of the conversation. Not well. She needs to know what's happening and when. If we have to change plans suddenly, she gets really upset. And she doesn't like loud noises or crowds. They looked at each other across the small table, both recognizing the significance of what wasn't being said directly. You think Emma might be autistic, Marcus said finally. I think Emma might share some neurological characteristics with me, Sarah replied carefully. But I'm not qualified to make diagnostic assessments. That would require evaluation by appropriate professionals. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, trying to process this possibility. I never considered it. I mean, she's always been quirky. But I thought that was just her personality. Autism isn't the absence of personality, Sarah said gently. It's a different neurological architecture that affects how we process information and interact with the world. If Emma is autistic, it doesn't change who she is. It might just explain why certain things are more difficult for her than they are for other children. Would it help her? I mean, if she was diagnosed, would that make things easier? It might. Understanding autism can provide access to appropriate educational supports and social accommodations. It can also help family members understand why certain interactions produce stress and how to modify environments to be more supportive. Marcus was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee as he thought about Emma's struggles with school, her intense interests, her need for predictability. Things that had always seemed like challenges to overcome suddenly looked different when viewed through the lens Sarah was offering. How old were you when you found out? He asked. 4, but my presentation was more obvious than what you're describing with Emma. I had significant language delays and more pronounced sensory sensitivities. Girls often mask their autistic traits better than boys, which can delay diagnosis. Mask? Learn to imitate neurotypical social behaviors, even when they don't come naturally. It's often an unconscious adaptation to social pressure, but it can make autism harder to recognize. Marcus thought about Emma's tendency to mirror other children's interests when she wanted to fit in, even though her own fascinations clearly ran much deeper. That sounds exhausting. It can be. But it's also a survival skill in a world that isn't always designed to accommodate neurological differences. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Marcus was reconsidering years of interactions with his daughter, seeing patterns he'd missed. Sarah was thinking about the profound trust Marcus had shown by listening to her observations about his child without defensiveness or denial. Can I ask you something? Marcus said eventually. Of course. What was it like for you growing up? I mean, if Emma is autistic, what should I know to help her? Sarah considered the question carefully. The most important thing my parents did was accept that I processed the world differently rather than trying to force me to be someone I wasn't. They found ways to accommodate my needs while still encouraging me to develop skills for navigating social situations. Like what? They allowed me to have intense interests and supported them even when those interests seemed unusual for a child my age. They helped me understand social rules by explaining them directly rather than expecting me to intuit them. And they never made me feel ashamed of my differences. Marcus nodded, thinking about how often Emma had been told to stop talking about dinosaurs or to pay attention to things that didn't interest her. They also found me mentors and role models, Sarah continued. Adults who were autistic and successful, who could show me that being different didn't mean being limited. Is that what you're doing now? Being successful despite being autistic? Sarah tilted her head, considering the question. I'm successful because I'm autistic, not despite it. My attention to detail, pattern recognition, and systematic thinking are advantages in my work as a data analyst. My reliability and direct communication style are assets in professional relationships. The challenge isn't autism itself, it's navigating a world that often misunderstands what autism actually looks like. What does it look like? Different for everyone. For me, it means I notice things other people miss. I remember conversations verbatim from years ago. I can focus intensely on complex problems for hours at a time, and I experience emotions very deeply, even though I might not express them in conventional ways. Those all sound like strengths. They are. But they can also be overwhelming. Sometimes, I feel sound and light and texture more intensely than most people, which means certain environments are exhausting for me. I need more time to process social information, so group conversations can be difficult. And I struggle with ambiguity or sudden changes in plans. Marcus found himself thinking about the community center event. How overwhelming that environment must have been for Sarah. Is that why the matchmaking thing was so hard? Partially. Large groups, unpredictable social interactions, and the pressure to present myself in a way that would appeal to strangers who might not understand my communication style. It was like being asked to perform in a language I'd studied, but never spoke fluently. But you stayed. I stayed because I want companionship and partnership, and I was willing to endure discomfort to pursue those goals. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of the courage it had taken for Sarah to put herself in that situation. I'm glad you stayed, are you? Yeah, this is the first real conversation I've had with another adult in months. Maybe years. What makes it real? Marcus considered this. You say what you mean. You don't expect me to guess what you're thinking or read between the lines. And you're interested in things that matter, not just small talk about weather or television shows. Many people enjoy small talk. Not many people. Sarah smiled, the expression transforming her face in a way that made Marcus's pulse quicken. No, you're not. They ordered more coffee and continued talking, the conversation flowing in directions neither of them had anticipated. Sarah told Marcus about her work analyzing marketing data for a regional consulting firm, how she'd discovered patterns in consumer behavior that had helped several clients increase their sales by significant margins. Marcus talked about his plans to eventually open his own auto repair shop, his dreams of building something he could pass on to his children. What's stopping you? Sarah asked when he described the small business loan he'd been considering. For 2 years, practical concerns. Single income, 2 kids, no guarantee the business would succeed. Rachel always said I was too cautious, but after she died, Marcus shrugged. Taking risks became a luxury I couldn't afford. Risk assessment is important, Sarah agreed. But excessive caution can also be limiting. Have you conducted a comprehensive analysis of the potential benefits versus the likely costs? You mean like a business plan? More detailed than that. Financial projections, market analysis, timeline for profitability, contingency planning for various scenarios. The kind of systematic evaluation that provides objective data for decision-making, Marcus laughed. I've thought about most of those things, but never written them down in any organized way. Organization facilitates analysis. I could help. You create a comprehensive evaluation framework if you're interested. The offer was made casually, but Marcus heard the underlying significance. Sarah was volunteering to invest her time and considerable analytical skills in his dreams, despite having known him for less than a week. Why would you do that? Because helping people achieve their goals provides me with satisfaction, and because your success would benefit Emma and Jake. Also because I find business analysis intellectually stimulating. All practical reasons. Yes, though I should also mention that I'm beginning to care about your well-being in ways that extend beyond practical considerations. The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable in the way that only Sarah's direct communication style could achieve. Marcus felt his heart rate increase as he processed what she'd said. "Sarah, I realize that emotional attachment develops more gradually for most people," she continued, not quite meeting his eyes. "And I understand if my directness about such matters is uncomfortable or premature." "It's not uncomfortable," Marcus said quickly. "It's unexpected, but not uncomfortable." "Unexpected how?" Marcus struggled to find words for what he was feeling. "I haven't met anyone who could be so honest about caring. Most people, especially early in a relationship, they play games or try to seem less interested than they really are." "That sounds inefficient." "It is inefficient. But it's also the normal way people date." "I don't do things the normal way." "No," Marcus agreed, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. "You don't. And I'm starting to think that might be exactly what I need." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, studying the contrast between his calloused fingers and her smooth ones. Physical contact with near strangers usually triggered her sensory defensiveness, but Marcus's touch felt warm and steady rather than overwhelming. "Your hands are larger than average," she observed. "Is that a problem?" "No, it's an observation." "I like observations. What else do you observe?" Sarah tilted her head, considering. "You have a small scar on your left knuckle that appears to be from mechanical work rather than accident. You bite your nails when you're nervous, but stopped doing so approximately 20 minutes ago, which suggests you're becoming more comfortable. And you've been unconsciously matching my speech patterns, speaking more slowly and precisely than you did when we first sat down." "I have?" "Yes, it indicates either natural empathy or conscious effort to accommodate my communication style. Both are positive indicators for potential relationship compatibility." Marcus found himself smiling despite the clinical nature of her analysis. "You really do notice everything." "Yes. Is that problematic?" "It's different. But different isn't necessarily bad." They stayed at the coffee shop for 3 hours, talking about everything from Emma's educational needs to Sarah's butterfly research, to Marcus's memories of Rachel and the life they'd built together. Sarah listened to stories about his late wife without jealousy or discomfort, understanding instinctively that honoring past love didn't diminish the possibility of future connection. When they finally reluctantly agreed it was time to leave, Marcus walked Sarah to her car, a practical sedan that was exactly what he would have expected her to drive. Clean, reliable, well-maintained, with a parking permit for the downtown library displayed prominently on the dashboard. "Sarah," he said as she unlocked her car door, "would you like to meet Emma and Jake? Not as a formal introduction, just casually. Maybe at the butterfly garden you mentioned?" Sarah paused with her hand on the door handle. "You want me to meet your children?" "Only if you're comfortable with that. I know it's a big step, and kids can be unpredictable. I enjoy children when the interaction parameters are clearly defined." A nature center provides structured activity options and educational opportunities. "Yes, I would like to meet Emma and Jake." "Next Saturday?" "Next Saturday is acceptable." "Should I research age-appropriate butterfly information for Emma, or would that be presumptuous?" Marcus felt that now familiar warmth in his chest, the sensation of being understood in ways he'd forgotten were possible. "That would be perfect. Emma loves it when adults take her interests seriously. Then I'll prepare accordingly." As Sarah drove away, Marcus stood in the parking lot watching her car disappear down Maple Street. He felt something he hadn't experienced in years, anticipation for the future that wasn't tinged with anxiety or fear. For the first time since Rachel's death, he was excited about the possibility of sharing his life with someone new. That evening, as he tucked Emma into bed, she looked up at him with her serious dark eyes and asked, "Daddy, did you have a good day?" "Yeah, sweetheart. I had a very good day." "Good days are important," Emma said solemnly. "Mrs. Rodriguez says good days." Make the hard days easier to remember. Marcus kissed her forehead, thinking about Sarah's gentle analysis of Emma's behaviors and the possibility that his daughter might finally have access to understanding and support he'd never known how to provide. "Hey, Em, yeah? How would you feel about meeting a new friend next weekend? Someone who knows a lot about butterflies?" Emma's eyes widened with interest. "Real butterflies or pictures of butterflies?" "Real ones. At the Nature Center." "Does she know about monarch migration?" Marcus smiled, wondering how Sarah would react to being immediately tested on her butterfly knowledge. "She knows about monarch migration." "Then I definitely want to meet her," Emma declared with the decisive enthusiasm she brought to all her genuine interests. As Marcus turned off her light and headed to his own room, he reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. A week ago, he'd been an exhausted single father going through the motions of daily survival. Tonight, he was a man with plans for Saturday, a woman who cared about his dreams, and the growing certainty that sometimes the best changes came disguised as the most unexpected encounters. In her own apartment across town, Sarah Chen was conducting her evening routine with the same methodical precision she brought to everything in her life. Teacup washed and returned to its designated location, phone charging in its specific position on the nightstand, clothes for tomorrow selected and laid out according to weather predictions and planned activities. But tonight, her usual pre-sleep anxiety about the next day's uncertainties was replaced by something entirely different: eager anticipation for next Saturday's butterfly garden visit, and the chance to meet the two small people who meant everything to Marcus Thompson. For the first time in months, Sarah fell asleep without needing to count backwards from 100 or listen to guided meditation recordings. Instead, she dreamed about monarch butterflies with children's faces, flying in perfect formation toward a destination that felt remarkably like home. The Riverside Nature Center occupied 43 acres of carefully preserved woodland on the outskirts of town, with winding trails that connected various themed gardens designed to showcase native plant species and their relationships with local wildlife. Sarah had visited the center dozens of times over the past 2 years, always alone, always with a specific research purpose in mind. Today felt entirely different as she stood near the entrance gate, consulting her phone for the exact time and watching for Marcus's familiar pickup truck. She'd spent the previous evening preparing for this meeting, with the same methodical attention she brought to important work presentations. Her research had yielded a collection of fascinating facts about monarch butterflies specifically calibrated for an 8-year-old's attention span, along with several observation activities that would appeal to a kinesthetic learner. She'd also prepared backup conversation topics in case Emma's interests proved more diverse than Marcus had indicated, and she'd practiced appropriate responses to common questions children might ask about autism. The preparation felt necessary, rather than excessive. Meeting Marcus's children represented a significant escalation in their relationship, one that required her to demonstrate competence, not just as a potential romantic partner, but as someone who could integrate successfully into an existing family structure. The stakes felt higher than any professional challenge she'd ever faced. Marcus's truck appeared in the parking lot at exactly 10 o'clock, and Sarah felt her nervous system calibrate to a more manageable level of arousal. Punctuality was one of many small indicators that Marcus understood her need for predictability, even when he might not fully comprehend the neurological reasons behind that need. She watched through the windshield as Marcus spoke to his children, his gestures suggesting he was providing them with information about the person they were about to meet. Emma bounced slightly in her seat, exhibiting the kind of contained excitement Sarah recognized from her own childhood responses to anticipated special interests. Jake appeared more reserved, his posture suggesting careful evaluation rather than enthusiasm. As they approached the entrance gate, Sarah got her first clear look at Marcus's children. Emma was smaller than she'd expected, with dark hair and 2 neat braids and sneakers decorated with dinosaur decals. She moved with the slightly awkward gait Sarah remembered from her own childhood, when heightened proprioceptive awareness made each step require conscious attention. Jake was taller, with Marcus's brown eyes and the self-possessed demeanor of a child who'd learned to navigate adult responsibilities. "Sarah," Marcus said as they reached her, "I'd like you to meet Emma and Jake. Kids, this is Sarah, the butterfly expert I told you about." Emma stepped forward immediately, her dark eyes bright with interest. "Do you know about the 4th-generation life cycle difference in monarch butterflies?" Sarah blinked, surprised by the sophistication of the question. "Yes, the 4th generation lives 6 to 8 times longer than the first 3 generations, because they need to survive overwintering and complete the return migration to Mexico. It's one of the most remarkable adaptations in Lepidoptera biology." Emma's face lit up with the unmistakable expression of someone whose expertise had been recognized and validated. "Most adults don't know that part. Most adults haven't studied monarch migration as extensively as I have," Sarah replied. "Would you like to see the milkweed garden where they lay their eggs?" "Yes, please." Jake hung back slightly, studying Sarah with the careful assessment she'd observed in many pre-adolescents. "Are you my dad's girlfriend?" The directness of the question reminded Sarah powerfully of her own tendency to bypass social pleasantries in favor of essential information. "Your father and I are developing a friendship that may evolve into a romantic relationship," she answered honestly. "But that development depends on many factors, including whether we're compatible as part of a family unit." Jake nodded, apparently satisfied with her straightforward response. "Dad said you're really smart. Intelligence takes many forms," Sarah replied. "I have certain cognitive strengths, particularly in pattern recognition and systematic analysis. But your father has practical intelligence and emotional intelligence that I find quite remarkable." Marcus felt something warm unfurl in his chest as he listened to Sarah interact with his children. She spoke to them with the same direct respect she'd shown him, neither talking down to them nor overwhelming them with adult complexity. Most importantly, she seemed genuinely interested in their responses rather than simply performing appropriate behavior. They spent the first hour exploring the butterfly garden, with Emma firing questions at Sarah with machine gun rapidity and Sarah answering each one with detailed accuracy. Jake trailed behind them, occasionally asking his own questions, but mostly observing the dynamic between his potential stepmother and his sister. "The monarch caterpillars can only survive on milkweed plants," Sarah was explaining as they examined a particularly robust specimen, "because they've evolved to tolerate the toxic cardiac glycosides that would kill most other insects. Those same toxins make the adult butterflies unpalatable to predators." "So they're poisonous?" Emma asked, leaning in to get a closer look at the distinctive striped caterpillar Sarah had spotted. "Technically toxic rather than poisonous, but yes. The toxins serve as a defense mechanism. That's so cool. They eat poison and turn it into armor." "That's actually a very accurate metaphor," Sarah said, smiling at Emma's intuitive understanding of biological adaptation. Jake moved closer, his initial wariness beginning to dissolve. "How did you know so much about butterflies?" "I became interested in monarch migration about 5 years ago when I was researching mathematical patterns in nature," Sarah explained. "The precision of their navigation, despite their tiny brain size, represents a fascinating intersection of biology, mathematics, and environmental science." "Do you like other animals too, or just butterflies?" "I appreciate many forms of wildlife, but I tend to focus intensively on specific areas of interest rather than studying broadly. It's how my brain processes information most effectively." Emma looked up from the caterpillar she'd been observing. "My brain works like that too. I know everything about dinosaurs, but I don't know much about other animals. Intensive focus on particular subjects is often more valuable than general knowledge," Sarah told her. Deep expertise allows you to understand complex systems and make connections that other people might miss. Really? Absolutely. Your dinosaur knowledge probably helps you understand evolutionary biology, geological timescales, and extinction patterns in ways that most adults never will. Emma beamed, standing a little straighter. Sarah had just articulated something the 8-year-old had felt but never been able to express, that her intense interests weren't limitations, but rather different ways of engaging with learning and understanding. They moved through the nature center methodically, Sarah pointing out various plants and their relationships with pollinating insects while Emma peppered her with increasingly sophisticated questions. Jake contributed his own observations, demonstrating the kind of practical intelligence Marcus had mentioned. "Look at how the bees move from flower to flower," Jake noted as they watched a section of the native plant garden. "They're not random, they're following some kind of pattern." "Excellent observation," Sarah said, genuinely impressed. Bees do follow patterns based on efficiency and energy conservation. They tend to visit flowers in systematic sequences that minimize flight distance while maximizing nectar collection. Like a delivery route. Exactly like a delivery route. Bees are natural logistics experts. Marcus watched this interaction with growing amazement. In the space of 2 hours, Sarah had managed to engage both of his children in ways that played to their individual strengths and interests. She didn't try to manage or control their behavior, but rather worked with their natural curiosity and energy levels. When Emma discovered a small salamander under a log near the creek, Sarah didn't rush to pull her away or worry about dirt on her clothes. Instead, she knelt beside the 8-year-old and helped her observe the creature properly. "Salamanders are indicator species," Sarah explained as they watched the small amphibian navigate through the leaf litter. "Their presence tells us that this ecosystem is healthy because they're very sensitive to environmental pollutants. So they're like nature's warning system?" "That's another excellent metaphor, Emma. You have a gift for understanding complex biological concepts." Emma glowed under the praise, but Sarah's commendation carried more weight than typical adult approval because it was based on demonstrated expertise rather than generic encouragement. After 3 hours at the Nature Center, they drove to a small family restaurant that Marcus had chosen specifically for its quiet atmosphere and simple menu. Sarah had mentioned her sensory sensitivities during one of their coffee shop conversations, and he'd wanted to ensure their first family meal together took place in an environment where she could be comfortable. The restaurant, Miller's Family Kitchen, occupied a converted farmhouse with individual dining rooms that muffled sound and provided visual privacy. Marcus requested a corner table away from the kitchen, and Sarah felt her shoulders relax as they settled into the quieter space. "This is a good choice," she told Marcus quietly. "The acoustic environment is much more manageable than most restaurants. I figured noise might be an issue. Emma doesn't like loud places either." I noticed that she moved away from the main trail when those school groups arrived at the Nature Center. "Does she have other sensory sensitivities?" "Crowds, loud music, certain textures in clothing. She won't wear anything with tags or seams that hit wrong." Marcus paused. "After our conversation last week, I've been paying more attention to things like that." "Sensory processing differences are common in autism," Sarah said carefully. "They're not problems to be fixed, just neurological variations that require accommodation." Emma, who'd been studying the children's menu with intense concentration, looked up suddenly. "Are you autistic?" The question was delivered with Emma's characteristic directness, and Sarah found herself appreciating the child's straightforward approach to information gathering. "Yes, I am." "Is that why you know so much about butterflies?" "Partly. Autism often includes the ability to focus very intensively on subjects that interest us, which can lead to deep expertise." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. "I think I might be autistic too." Marcus felt his breath catch. During their drive to the Nature Center, Emma had peppered him with questions about Sarah's autism, displaying the same systematic curiosity she brought to all new information. He'd tried to answer honestly while being careful not to influence her self-perception. "What makes you think that?" Sarah asked, her tone carefully neutral. "I do the same things you do. I focus really hard on stuff I like, and I notice details other people miss, and I don't like it when things are loud or chaotic." Emma paused, considering. "And talking to you feels easier than talking to most adults. How does it feel easier?" "You say what you mean. And when I tell you about dinosaurs, you actually listen instead of just pretending to be interested." Sarah glanced at Marcus, who nodded slightly, giving her permission to continue the conversation. "Those are all traits that can be associated with autism," Sarah said. "But autism is also much more complex than any single set of characteristics. If you're interested in learning more about it, there are professionals who can help you understand how your brain works." "Would that be good or bad?" "Neither good nor bad. Just informative. Understanding how your brain processes information can help you find strategies that work well for you and help other people understand how to support you better." Jake, who'd been listening to this exchange with obvious fascination, leaned forward. "Do all autistic people like the same things?" "Not at all," Sarah replied. "Autism affects how we process information and interact with the world, but our individual interests and personalities are just as varied as anyone else's." "What kinds of things do you like besides butterflies?" "I enjoy mathematical patterns, classical music, vintage postcards, and data analysis. I also like organizing information systems and solving complex problems." "That's a weird combination," Jake observed, but without judgment. "Most people's interests are weird combinations when you really examine them," Sarah pointed out. "Human preferences rarely follow logical patterns." Their food arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics while they ate. Emma continued her questions about autism and butterflies, while Jake shared stories about school and his friends. Sarah listened carefully to both children, filing away information about their personalities and preferences. Halfway through the meal, Emma suddenly announced, "Sarah, I like you." "Thank you, Emma, I like you too. Are you going to marry my dad?" Marcus nearly choked on his sandwich while Jake rolled his eyes at his sister's bluntness. "Emma," Marcus started, but Sarah held up a hand. "Marriage is a significant commitment that requires extensive compatibility assessment," Sarah said. "Seriously, your father and I are still in the early stages of determining whether our personalities, values, and life goals align sufficiently for a long-term partnership." Emma nodded as if this were a perfectly reasonable response. "How long does that usually take?" "There's no standard timeline. Some people know quickly, others need years to make that determination." "I hope you decide yes," Emma said matter-of-factly. "You're the first adult who's talked to me about dinosaurs without getting bored. And you're the first 8-year-old who's asked me about fourth-generation monarch life cycles," Sarah replied. "That suggests good intellectual compatibility." Jake grinned. Emma stumps most adults with her dinosaur questions. "Specialized knowledge can be isolating when other people don't share your interests," Sarah acknowledged. "But it can also be incredibly rewarding when you find people who appreciate your expertise." After lunch, they returned to the nature center for one final walk through the butterfly garden. Emma wanted to show Sarah a specific milkweed plant where she'd observed unusual caterpillar behavior, and Sarah was genuinely interested in Emma's observations. "See how this caterpillar is moving differently than the others?" Emma pointed to a monarch larva that seemed to be wandering rather than feeding. Sarah examined the caterpillar carefully. "That's interesting. It might be preparing to pupate. When they're ready to form their chrysalis, monarchs often exhibit restless behavior while searching for the perfect location." "Really? So it's not sick or lost?" "No, it's following genetic programming. In a day or two, it will attach itself to a sturdy branch and begin metamorphosis. Emma watched the caterpillar with fascination, clearly imagining the transformation process. That's amazing. It knows exactly what to do, even though it's never done it before. Genetic programming is remarkably sophisticated, Sarah agreed. Though I'd argue that learning and adaptation are equally impressive. Humans develop expertise through study and practice rather than instinct. Like how you learned about butterflies. Exactly. As they prepared to leave, Jake approached Sarah while Marcus and Emma were examining a display about pollinator gardens. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. "Of course. Are you going to be good to my dad? I mean, if you guys get serious?" The question carried weight beyond Jake's years, and Sarah recognized the protective instinct behind it. This 12-year-old had watched his father struggle through grief and single parenthood, and he wasn't about to let anyone cause additional pain. "I can't predict the future," Sarah said honestly. "But I can tell you that I don't enter relationships casually, and I don't make commitments I'm not prepared to honor. If your father and I decide to build a life together, I would be fully invested in that decision." Jake studied her face, apparently finding what he was looking for. "Okay, good. May I ask you something in return?" "Sure. What would you need from me to feel comfortable with my presence in your family?" Jake considered this carefully. "Just be honest with us. Don't pretend to be someone you're not just to make Dad happy. And don't try to replace our mom." "I would never attempt to replace your mother," Sarah said firmly. "She was irreplaceable. If I become part of your family, it would be as someone new, not as a substitute for someone you've lost." "Good," Jake said again, and this time he smiled. The drive back to town was filled with Emma's chatter about butterflies and plans for future nature center visits. Jake was quieter but seemed relaxed, occasionally joining the conversation with observations or questions. Marcus found himself stealing glances at Sarah in the passenger seat, noting how naturally she'd integrated into their family dynamic. When they reached Sarah's apartment complex, Emma immediately asked when they could see her again. "That depends on whether your father thinks today went well," Sarah said diplomatically. "Dad?" Emma turned to Marcus with obvious expectation. "I think today went very well," Marcus said, meeting Sarah's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Would you like to have dinner with us this week? I could cook, or we could order pizza." "I would enjoy that," Sarah replied. "Though I should mention that I have limited tolerance for highly processed foods. Pizza would need to be from a restaurant that uses quality ingredients. We know a good place," Jake said. "They make everything fresh." "Then pizza sounds perfect." As Sarah gathered her purse and the small notebook where she'd recorded Emma's butterfly observations, Marcus got out to walk her to her door. "Thank you," he said as they stood beside her building's entrance. "For what?" "For being wonderful with them, for treating Emma's questions seriously and understanding what Jake needed to hear, for fitting into our weird little family like you'd always been part of it." Sarah felt something warm and unfamiliar in her chest, a sense of belonging she'd never experienced with another family. "They're remarkable children, Marcus. Emma's intellectual curiosity is extraordinary, and Jake's emotional intelligence is well beyond his chronological age. They like you. I like them too, very much." Marcus stepped closer, and Sarah didn't. "Retreat. Sarah, I need you to know that this feels right to me. All of it. You with us with you. I know it's early, but I can't imagine wanting to be with anyone else." "I feel the same way," Sarah admitted. "Though I should warn you that my emotional processing can be intense. When I care about someone, I care completely." "That doesn't sound like a warning. That sounds like a promise." He leaned down and kissed her then, gentle and careful and full of possibilities. Sarah kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong beneath her palms. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. "Wednesday for pizza?" Marcus asked. Wednesday for pizza, Sarah confirmed. As Marcus drove away with his children, Emma immediately launched into detailed analysis of everything Sarah had taught her about butterflies. Jake listened tolerantly to his sister's enthusiasm while making mental notes about Sarah's personality and her potential fit with their family. She's different from other adults, Emma observed. In a good way. Yeah, Jake agreed. She actually listens when you talk. Do you think Dad loves her? Emma asked with her typical directness. Jake considered this. I think he's getting there. And I think she might be getting there too. Good, Emma said decisively. I want her to be part of our family. In her apartment, Sarah conducted her evening routine with unusual efficiency, her mind replaying the day's interactions rather than focusing on tomorrow's anxieties. She'd never imagined that integrating into someone else's family structure could feel so natural, so right. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah fell asleep not thinking about butterflies or data patterns or mathematical sequences, but about the way Emma's face had lit up with understanding, the protective kindness in Jake's questions, and the feeling of Marcus's arms around her as they'd said goodnight. Outside her window, the first autumn leaves were beginning to fall, marking the change of seasons and the beginning of something entirely new in all their lives. 3 days later, Marcus stood in his kitchen attempting to prepare dinner while Emma pestered him with questions about proper table setting procedures, and Jake argued with his math homework at the kitchen counter. The controlled chaos of family life was in full swing when Sarah arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, carrying a small gift bag and wearing a blue dress that brought out the warmth in her dark eyes. Perfect timing, Marcus said, opening the door. With flour-dusted hands. I'm attempting homemade pizza with mixed results. I brought backup, Sarah said, holding up the gift bag. Vegetarian options in case the primary meal doesn't meet expectations. Emma appeared at Marcus's elbow, curious about the bag. What kind of backup? Hummus, whole grain crackers, and fresh vegetables, plus some cookies I made last night. You made cookies? Emma's eyes widened with interest. Oatmeal chocolate chip. No artificial ingredients or excessive sugar. Sarah makes her own food, Marcus explained to his children. She's very particular about ingredients. Quality nutrition effects. Cognitive function, Sarah said matter-of-factly. I prefer to control the variables in my diet when possible. Jake looked up from his homework. That actually makes sense. Coach always talks about how what we eat affects our performance. Exactly. The brain requires consistent glucose levels and specific nutrients to function optimally. Emma tugged at Sarah's dress. Can you help me set the table? Dad says there's a right way to do it, but he never explains what the right way is. I'd be happy to help. Table setting follows logical organizational principles. For the next 15 minutes, Sarah worked with Emma to create what she called an optimized dining configuration, explaining the practical reasons behind traditional place-setting arrangements. Emma absorbed every detail with the intensity she brought to all new information systems. The fork goes on the left because most people are right-handed and use their dominant hand for cutting, Sarah explained as they arranged the silverware. The knife blade faces the plate to minimize accident risk, and the napkin placement depends on whether it's meant for utility or decoration. This is so much better than just put stuff on the table, Emma said, clearly delighted with the systematic approach. Meanwhile, Marcus's pizza had achieved what could generously be called rustic charm, with uneven cheese distribution and a crust that was simultaneously too thick and too thin depending on the section. Sarah examined it with the same analytical attention she'd given the butterfly caterpillars. The irregular thickness suggests you rolled the dough from the center outward rather than using consistent pressure throughout, she observed. But the ingredients appear high quality and the aroma is appealing. Diplomatic way of saying it looks like a disaster, Marcus said ruefully. It looks like a first attempt at a complex culinary skill, Sarah corrected. Pizza dough requires practice to master. Have you made pizza before? 17 times. I documented the variables that affected success rates until I achieved consistent results. Jake laughed. You kept track of your pizza experiments? Data collection improves outcomes, Sarah said simply. Would you like me to share my findings? Yes, Emma said immediately, while Jake nodded with genuine interest. As they ate the imperfect but surprisingly tasty pizza, Sarah shared her systematic approach to recipe optimization while the children peppered her with questions about her various culinary experiments. Marcus listened, marveling at how easily Sarah had slipped into their dinner table dynamic. Sarah, Emma said during a pause in the conversation, can I ask you about autism stuff? Of course. Does being autistic make you sad sometimes? The question was delivered with Emma's characteristic directness, but Marcus could hear the underlying concern. His daughter was clearly trying to understand whether autism was something to worry about or simply a different way of existing. Sometimes, Sarah answered honestly. Not because I'm autistic, but because the world isn't always designed for people who think differently. It can be frustrating when others don't understand how I process information or why certain environments are difficult for me. Like loud restaurants? Exactly. Or social situations with unclear expectations or sudden changes in plans. Emma nodded thoughtfully. I get frustrated about those things too. That's understandable. Many people find those situations challenging, whether they're autistic or not. But being autistic also gives you advantages, right? Jake asked. Like how you notice patterns other people miss. Yes. Enhanced attention to detail, strong memory for specific interests, and the ability to focus intensely on complex problems. Those traits have been very valuable in my career and personal life. So it's not good or bad, Emma said slowly. It's just different. That's a very wise way to think about it. After dinner, while Marcus cleaned up the kitchen, Sarah helped Jake with his math homework. Her systematic approach to problem solving proved incredibly effective for his learning style, and Jake found himself understanding concepts that had been frustrating him for weeks. You're good at explaining things, Jake told her as they worked through a particularly challenging algebra problem. I enjoy breaking complex concepts into manageable components, Sarah replied. Mathematics follows logical patterns, which makes it satisfying to teach. Could you help me with science too sometime? I'm doing a project on ecosystems. I'd be happy to help. Ecosystem analysis involves many of the same systematic thinking skills we're using for algebra. Emma, meanwhile, had spread her dinosaur books across the living room floor and was creating what she called an evolutionary timeline, arranging plastic dinosaur figures according to geological periods. Sarah joined her on the floor, offering suggestions for organizing the display. This is incredibly comprehensive, Sarah said, examining Emma's collection. You've represented most major dinosaur groups across multiple time periods. I want to be a paleontologist when I grow up, Emma said seriously. But Dad says it might be hard to find jobs. Paleontology is a competitive field, Sarah acknowledged, but passion and expertise like yours are valuable assets. Have you considered related careers that might offer more opportunities? Like what? Museum education, science writing, geological consulting, or academic research. There are many ways to build a career around your dinosaur expertise. Emma's eyes lit up with possibilities she'd never considered. Really? Absolutely. Specialized knowledge opens doors to opportunities that most people never discover. Marcus listened to these conversations from the kitchen, feeling something profound settling into place. Sarah wasn't just interacting with his children. She was investing in their futures, taking their dreams seriously, and helping them see possibilities beyond their current horizons. When it was time for the children to go to bed, Emma asked if Sarah could read her a story. I don't have experience with bedtime story protocols, Sarah admitted. You just read out loud, Emma explained patiently. And maybe use different voices. For different characters. I can attempt that. Sarah sat on the edge of Emma's bed, reading from a book about a young girl who discovers a fossil in her backyard. She didn't use dramatic voices, but she read with careful attention to rhythm and emphasis, making the story feel important rather than performative. Sarah? Emma said when the story was finished. Yes? If you marry my dad, will you still like talking about dinosaurs with me? Emma, if I marry your father, it will be partly because I enjoy talking about dinosaurs with you. Your interests are part of who you are, and who you are is wonderful. Emma smiled and settled deeper into her blankets. Good. I was worried. You might get tired of dinosaur conversations. I don't think that's possible, Sarah said sincerely. As she turned off Emma's light, Sarah felt the unfamiliar sensation of maternal protectiveness. This bright, curious child deserved adults who celebrated her intense interests, rather than trying to redirect them toward more conventional pursuits. Jake was already in bed when Sarah stopped by his room to say goodnight. Thanks for helping. With the math, he said quietly. You're welcome. You're very intelligent, Jake. You just needed someone to explain the concepts in a way that matched your learning style. Sarah? Jake hesitated, then forged ahead. Are you going to stay? I mean, with our family? The question carried the weight of a child who'd already experienced profound loss and needed reassurance about the stability of new attachments. I can't predict the future, Sarah said honestly, but I can tell you that I don't make emotional investments lightly. If your father and I continue developing our relationship, it will be with the intention of building something permanent. Jake nodded, apparently satisfied with her straightforward response. Good. Dad's been happier since he met you. He makes me happy too, and Emma really likes you. She needs adults who understand how her brain works. I think Emma's brain works beautifully, Sarah said. She just needs people who appreciate different types of intelligence. After the children were settled, Marcus and Sarah sat together on his living room couch, the house quiet around them. Marcus had built a small fire in the fireplace, and the warm light played across Sarah's face as she sat with perfect posture. Hands folded in her lap. Thank you, Marcus said quietly. For what this time? For being perfect with them. For taking Jake's homework seriously and reading to Emma and making them both feel seen and valued. They are valuable, Sarah replied. Emma's intellectual curiosity is remarkable, and Jake's emotional maturity is extraordinary. You've raised wonderful children, Marcus. We've had help. My mom, Mrs. Rodriguez next door, teachers who cared. But tonight, watching you with them, it felt like we finally had all the pieces we needed. Sarah turned to face him fully. What do you mean? Someone who understands Emma's intensity and doesn't try to tone it down. Someone who challenges Jake intellectually without making him feel inadequate. Someone who sees them as individuals rather than just Marcus's kids. I do see them as individuals. They're remarkable people in their own right. Marcus reached for her hand, marveling again at how right it felt to touch her. Sarah, I need to tell you something. What? I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she processed the emotional significance of his declaration. Love is a complex neurochemical process, she said finally, involving dopamine, oxytocin, and various other neurotransmitters that create feelings of attachment and emotional bonding. Marcus blinked. That's your response to me saying I love you? No, Sarah said, moving closer to him on the couch. That's my intellectual response to the concept of love. My emotional response is that I'm falling in love with you too, and it's both terrifying and wonderful in ways I never expected. Why terrifying? Because I've never felt this level of emotional investment before. Because loving you means loving Emma and Jake too, and the responsibility of that feels enormous. Because I've never been part of a family unit, and I'm not sure I understand all the protocols involved. Marcus pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. There are no protocols, Sarah. There's just us, figuring it out together. Together, Sarah repeated, as if testing the word. Together. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Sarah felt something she'd never experienced before. The deep contentment of belonging somewhere, of being wanted not despite her differences but because of who she was. Marcus, yeah? I think Emma should be evaluated for autism. Not because there's anything wrong with her, but because understanding her neurological architecture could help her navigate school and social situations more successfully. I've been thinking the same thing since our conversation at the coffee shop. Do you know anyone who could do that kind of evaluation? Dr. Martinez at the Children's Development Center specializes in autism assessment for girls. She understands that autism presents differently in females and doesn't rely solely on traditional diagnostic criteria. Would you come with us? To the appointment, I mean. Emma trusts you, and you understand autism from the inside. If you think it would be helpful, yes. Marcus kissed her temple, breathing in the subtle scent of her shampoo. It would be helpful. Everything's more manageable when you're here. I feel the same way, Sarah admitted. About being here, I mean. This house, this family, it feels like home in ways I've never experienced before. It is home, Marcus said simply. For all of us. As they prepared to say goodnight, Sarah lingered at the front door, reluctant to return to her quiet apartment after the warmth and connection of the evening. Sarah, Marcus said softly, you don't have to leave. I mean, if you want to stay, you could. We have a guest room, or you could not share your bed. Sarah finished, because directness had always been easier for her than implication. Only if you want to, no pressure. Sarah considered this carefully. Physical intimacy represented another level of relationship progression, one that carried both emotional and practical implications. But standing in Marcus's doorway, surrounded by the evidence of the life they were building together, staying felt like the most natural thing in the world. I would like to stay, she said finally. But I should warn you that I have specific sleep requirements, temperature control, minimal ambient light, and I sometimes need to adjust my position multiple times before finding optimal comfort. Marcus smiled, struck again by her ability to turn even intimate moments into practical discussions. I think we can work with that. Good, Sarah said, stepping back into the house and closing the door behind her. Because I'm not ready to leave this feeling behind yet. What feeling? Belonging, Sarah said simply. I've never belonged anywhere before. As they turned off lights and checked locks together, performing the small domestic rituals of a shared household, both of them understood that something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer two separate people exploring the possibility of connection. They were becoming a family, with all the joys and responsibilities that entailed. The foundation they were building together was strong enough to support whatever came next. The emergency at Riverside Elementary came without warning on a Tuesday morning in November. Sarah was in the middle of analyzing quarterly sales data when her phone rang with Marcus's number flashing on the screen. She answered immediately, recognizing that he wouldn't call during work hours unless something significant had occurred. Sarah, I need your help. Marcus's voice carried strain and barely controlled frustration. The school called about Emma. She's having what they're calling a behavioral episode, and they want me to pick her up immediately. What happened? They changed her classroom routine without warning, moved her desk to a different location for a group project, and when she tried to explain that the new seating arrangement was affecting her concentration, the teacher told her to stop being difficult. Marcus paused, and Sarah could hear traffic sounds in the background. She's locked herself in the bathroom and won't come out. They've tried everything they can think of. Sarah felt a familiar surge of protective anger at the school's mishandling of what was clearly a sensory and routine disruption rather than defiance. "I'll meet you there." "You don't have to. Marcus, I'm already gathering my things." Emma needs advocates who understand what's happening to her nervous system right now. 20 minutes later, Sarah walked into Riverside Elementary, Maine office wearing her most professional blazer and carrying a leather portfolio that contained printed articles about autism accommodations in educational settings. She'd learned years ago that documentation and confident presentation could transform her from difficult parento-informed consultant in administrative situations. Marcus was standing near the secretary's desk, looking haggard and defensive, the expression of a parent who'd been made to feel that his child's needs were unreasonable impositions. "Any change?" Sarah asked quietly. "No. The principal wants to discuss Emma's behavioral patterns and suggest strategies for better classroom compliance." The bitterness in Marcus's voice was unmistakable. "Where is she now?" "Still in the bathroom near her classroom. The teacher, Mrs. Henderson, is standing guard outside like Emma's some kind of flight risk." Sarah nodded grimly. "May I try talking to her?" "The principal said only family members." "Then you'll need to authorize me as Emma's advocate." Sarah interrupted, turning to address the secretary with calm authority. "I'm a family friend with expertise in autism spectrum disorders, and I'm here to provide consultation on appropriate crisis intervention strategies." The secretary looked uncertain, but before she could respond, Principal Williams emerged from his office. Sarah had researched him during her drive to the school and knew he'd been in education for 15 years without any specialized training in autism or sensory processing disorders. "Mr. Thompson, I'm glad you're here. We need to discuss Emma's increasing difficulty with classroom expectations and develop a behavior modification plan." "Emma doesn't need behavior modification," Sarah said before Marcus could respond. "She needs environmental accommodations for her neurological differences." Principal Williams looked at Sarah with obvious skepticism. "And you are?" "Sarah Chen, autism specialist and family advocate. I'm here to ensure that Emma receives appropriate support rather than punitive responses to neurologically based reactions." It wasn't technically a lie. Sarah's lived experience with autism, combined with her extensive research into educational accommodations, did qualify her as a specialist of sorts. The confident delivery and professional terminology had the desired effect of shifting the conversation's tone. "I see. Well, perhaps we should all go see how Emma is doing and discuss this situation in context." They walked through the hallways toward Emma's classroom, passing colorful bulletin boards and the distant sounds of children engaged in learning activities. Sarah noted the harsh fluorescent lighting, the echoing acoustics, and the general sensory assault that typical school environments presented to neurologically sensitive children. Mrs. Henderson stood outside the girls' bathroom door with the expression of someone who'd reached the end of her patience and training. She was a woman in her 50s who'd probably managed thousands of children successfully, using traditional disciplinary approaches that simply didn't apply to autistic students. "She's been in there for 45 minutes, Mrs. Henderson reported. "I've tried reasoning with her, offering incentives, explaining consequences. Nothing works." "Have you tried understanding what triggered her distress?" Sarah asked. "She was being disruptive during our group activity. When I moved her to a quieter location, she became agitated and refused to participate." Sarah exchanged a look with Marcus. The teacher's description revealed a complete misunderstanding of what had actually occurred. "May I speak with Emma?" Sarah asked. "She won't respond to adults right now," Mrs. Henderson said dismissively. "She'll respond to me," Sarah replied with quiet confidence. Sarah approached the bathroom door and knocked gently in a specific pattern. 3 soft taps, pause, 2 soft taps. It was a code she'd developed with Emma during their butterfly garden visits, a way of identifying herself without requiring verbal response. Emma, it's Sarah. I'm here with your dad and we'd like to help. Silence. I brought some information about monarch migration patterns that I thought you might find interesting. Did you know that they use polarized light patterns to navigate? When the sun isn't visible? More silence, but Sarah detected a slight shift in the quality of attention from behind the door. The navigation system is so sophisticated that scientists are trying to replicate it for drone technology. Imagine if your butterfly knowledge could help design robots that explore other planets. A small voice came through the door. Really? Really. But I'd rather explain it properly than try to talk through a bathroom door. Would you be willing to come out so we can find a quieter place to discuss advanced Lepidoptera navigation systems? There was a long pause, then the sound of the lock. Turning. Emma emerged looking disheveled and tear-stained, her eyes red from crying but fixed on Sarah with desperate hope. Can we go somewhere without fluorescent lights? Emma asked quietly. They're making everything too loud. Absolutely, Sarah sighed, extending her hand. Let's find a better environment for both learning and conversation. Principal Williams looked skeptical. Emma needs to return to her classroom and complete her assigned work. Emma needs sensory regulation before she can engage in learning activities, Sarah corrected firmly. Forcing a dysregulated nervous system to perform academic tasks is counterproductive and potentially harmful. She turned to Marcus. Is there a quiet room we could use? Preferably with natural lighting and minimal auditory distractions? The library has a small study room, the principal offered reluctantly. Perfect. The study room was indeed perfect. Large windows providing natural light, soft carpeting that muffled sound, and bookshelves that created visual barriers against overwhelming stimuli. Emma immediately relaxed as they entered the space, her shoulders dropping from their defensive position near her ears. Better? Sarah asked. Emma nodded, settling into one of the comfortable chairs arranged around a small table. Can you tell me what happened this morning? Mrs. Henderson moved my desk right next to Jason's desk for the group project, but Jason taps his pencil constantly, and it makes it impossible for me to concentrate. When I tried to explain that I needed to sit somewhere else, she said I was being difficult and needed to learn to work with distractions. Sarah felt her jaw tighten but kept her expression neutral. That sounds frustrating. Then she said that if I couldn't handle a simple group activity, maybe I needed to be in a different classroom with children who had special needs. Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. She said it like special needs was something bad. Marcus's hands clenched into fists, but Sarah placed a calming hand on his arm. Emma, there's nothing wrong with having special needs, Sarah said gently. Everyone has needs, and some people's needs require specific accommodations. That doesn't make them less intelligent or capable. I know that, Emma said quickly. But Mrs. Henderson doesn't know that. She thinks needing accommodations means you're not as good as other kids. Mrs. Henderson is wrong, Sarah said flatly. And we're going to make sure she understands that. For the next 30 minutes, Sarah helped Emma process the morning's events, while Marcus observed the interaction with growing amazement. Sarah didn't minimize Emma's distress or try to convince her that the teacher's behavior was acceptable. Instead, she validated Emma's experience while providing frameworks for understanding and managing similar situations in the future. The important thing to remember, Sarah explained, is that your nervous system's response to sensory overload is automatic and protective. When your brain detects too much stimulation, it triggers stress responses designed to keep you safe. Understanding this can help you advocate for yourself more effectively. How? By explaining your needs in terms of learning optimization rather than personal comfort. Instead of saying, "This bothers me," you can say, "I learn better when auditory distractions are minimized." Emma nodded thoughtfully. That sounds more scientific. Exactly. People respond better to scientific explanations than emotional requests. When they finally emerged from the study room, Principal Williams and Mrs. Henderson were waiting with expressions that suggested they'd spent the time discussing Emma's problematic behavior rather than examining their own failure to provide appropriate accommodations. "I think we need to schedule a meeting to discuss Emma's educational needs," Sarah said before anyone else could speak. "Specifically, we need to address sensory accommodations, communication strategies, and staff training on autism spectrum support." "Now wait a minute," Mrs. Henderson began. "Emma hasn't been diagnosed with anything. She's just a bright child who needs to learn better self-regulation." "Actually," Marcus said quietly, "we have an appointment with Dr. Martinez next week for autism evaluation. But regardless of diagnosis, Emma has demonstrated specific learning needs that require accommodation." Sarah pulled out her portfolio and extracted several printed articles. "These are peer-reviewed studies on educational accommodations for children with sensory processing differences. I've highlighted the most relevant sections for your review." Principal Williams accepted the papers with obvious reluctance. "We'll certainly review these materials, but I want to be clear that we can't make special arrangements for every child who finds classroom activities challenging." "You're not making special arrangements," Sarah replied calmly. "You're providing equal access to education through appropriate accommodations. There's a significant legal difference." The mention of legal implications had the desired effect of shifting the conversation toward problem-solving rather than resistance. "What specific accommodations are you suggesting?" Principal Williams asked. Sarah had prepared for this question. "Preferential seating away from auditory distractions, advance notice of routine changes, access to a quiet space for sensory breaks, and permission to use fidget tools or noise-reducing headphones when needed." "Those seem reasonable," Marcus added. "We're not asking for anything that would disrupt other students' learning." Mrs. Henderson looked skeptical. "What if other children start demanding the same accommodations?" "Then you assess each child's individual needs and provide appropriate support," Sarah said simply. "That's called good teaching." The meeting concluded with an agreement to implement basic accommodations immediately while scheduling a more comprehensive planning session after Emma's evaluation. It wasn't everything Sarah had hoped for, but it was progress. As they walked to the parking lot, Emma slipped her hand into Sarah's. "Thank you for explaining things to them," Emma said quietly. "Nobody ever talks to teachers like that for me." "Adults who don't understand autism often need education themselves," Sarah replied. "The important thing is that you know there's nothing wrong with needing accommodations." "Sarah?" Emma looked up with her serious dark eyes. "Will you come to my doctor appointment next week?" "If your father thinks that would be helpful, yes." "I think it would be helpful," Marcus said firmly. "Dr. Martinez should hear your perspective on Emma's strengths and needs." That evening, after Emma and Jake had gone to bed, Marcus and Sarah sat in his living room processing the day's events. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace, casting warm light across their faces as they talked about educational advocacy and family protection. "I've never seen anyone handle school administrators like that," Marcus said, admiration clear in his voice. "You were like a professional advocate." "I've had practice standing up to people who misunderstand autism," Sarah replied, "though usually for myself rather than someone else." "Emma was right to trust you. You knew exactly what she needed and how to get it for her." Sarah leaned against Marcus's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "She's going to need advocates throughout her educational journey. Schools are slowly improving their understanding of autism, but progress is inconsistent. Will you help us navigate that? I mean, as Emma grows up and faces new challenges?" The question carried implications beyond educational advocacy. Marcus was asking whether Sarah would be there for the long term, through elementary school and middle school and high school and beyond. "Marcus," Sarah said softly, "I can't imagine being anywhere else." He turned to face her fully, his brown eyes serious and warm. "Sarah, I need to ask you something." "What? Will you marry me?" The question hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she processed the enormity of what he was asking. "You want to marry me," she said, needing to verify her understanding. "I want to marry you, adopt you into our family officially, and build a life together that honors who all of us are." Marcus took her hands in his. "I love your methodical approach to problem solving. I love how you see patterns that other people miss. I love that you take Emma's dinosaur obsession seriously and challenge Jake's thinking without making him feel inadequate." "Those are practical reasons for partnership," Sarah observed. "I also love how you laugh when you're genuinely delighted, how you organize your books by subject and publication date, how you remember the exact words of conversations from months ago. I love that you're teaching me to be more direct in my communication and more systematic in my planning." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes, an unusual emotional response that she didn't try to control. "I love you too," she said quietly. "I love how you listen without trying to fix things that aren't broken. I love how you've raised children who are curious and kind and emotionally intelligent. I love that you see my autism as a different way of thinking rather than a limitation to overcome." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes," Sarah confirmed, leaning forward to kiss him with the full intensity of her feelings. They spent the next hour making plans with the same methodical approach Sarah brought to all major decisions: wedding date, living arrangements, financial planning, parental responsibilities. They discussed Emma's upcoming evaluation and Jake's transition to high school. They talked about Marcus's dream of opening his own auto repair shop and Sarah's interest in pursuing additional certification in autism advocacy. "There's something else," Marcus said as they were finalizing details. "I want to adopt you as Emma and Jake's official stepmother, if you're willing. Not to replace their mother's memory, but to make your commitment to them legally recognized." Sarah felt something profound settle into place at his words. Official. Family status, legal recognition of her role in their lives, formal acknowledgement of her belonging. "I would be honored," she said simply. 3 months later, on a crisp February morning, Sarah Chen became Sarah Thompson in a small ceremony held at the Riverside Nature Center's butterfly garden. Emma and Jake served as official witnesses, with Emma wearing a dress decorated with monarch butterfly pins and Jake carrying rings in a wooden box he'd crafted himself in woodshop glass. The guest list was small but meaningful: Marcus's mother and brother, Sarah's parents, Mrs. Rodriguez from next door, Dr. Martinez, who'd completed Emma's autism evaluation, and several colleagues from both their workplaces. Principal Williams and Mrs. Henderson had even sent a congratulatory card, along with a note about the positive changes they'd observed in Emma since implementing her accommodation plan. Sarah wore a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and comfortable shoes that would allow her to walk confidently on the garden's gravel paths. She carried a bouquet of native wildflowers that Emma had helped select, choosing varieties that would attract butterflies when planted after the ceremony. The officiant was Dr. Martinez, who'd become licensed to perform ceremonies specifically to marry couples from the autism community. She understood the significance of neurodiversity in relationships and crafted vows that honored both Marcus and Sarah's individual strengths and their commitment to building an inclusive family. "Marcus," Dr. Martinez said, "do you promise to love Sarah as she is, support her needs, and continue learning about the unique gifts that autism brings to your family?" "I do," Marcus replied, his voice steady and sure. "Sarah, do you promise to love Marcus and his children, share your strengths with this family, and continue teaching them about the beauty of different ways of thinking?" "I do," Sarah said, her hand firmly clasped in Marcus's. "Then by the power vested in me by the state and by the strength of the love you've built together, I pronounce you husband and wife." The kiss was gentle and brief, appropriate for the public setting but full of promise for their private life together. As they turned to face their small gathering of loved ones, Emma cheered and Jake applauded with genuine enthusiasm. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Martinez announced, "I present the Thompson family." The reception was held in the Nature Center's education building, with decorations that Emma had designed around a butterfly migration theme. Tables were labeled with different stopping points along the monarch route, and centerpieces featured native plants in small pots that guests could take home to support pollinator populations. Sarah's wedding cake was a masterpiece of systematic planning, 3 tiers representing past, present, and future, decorated with sugar butterflies in different stages of metamorphosis. Emma had insisted on helping with the design, contributing detailed knowledge about wing patterns and coloration that made each butterfly scientifically accurate. During the reception, several guests approached Sarah to express their admiration for how she'd transformed not just Marcus's life but his children's understanding of their own potential. "Emma's teacher tells me she's become a classroom expert on accommodations," Mrs. Rodriguez reported with a smile. "She helps other students understand why some children need different learning environments. And Jake's been researching colleges with strong disability support services," added Marcus's mother. "He says he wants to understand how to advocate for his sister as she grows up." But the most meaningful moment came when Emma stood up during the informal toasts and asked to say something. "I want to thank Sarah for showing me that being different isn't being broken," Emma said, her 8-year-old voice carrying across the quiet room. "Before Sarah, I thought something was wrong with me because I notice things other people don't notice, and because I need things to be quiet sometimes." She paused, looking directly at Sarah with her serious dark eyes. "But Sarah taught me that my brain works really well, just differently. And now I know that being autistic means I have superpowers like pattern recognition and attention to detail. Sarah says those superpowers will help me be an amazing paleontologist someday." The room was completely silent as Emma continued. "I also want to thank Sarah for loving my dad and for loving Jake and me. We're a family now, and families take care of each other's superpowers." There wasn't a dry eye in the room as Emma sat down, completely unaware that she'd just delivered one of the most moving wedding speeches anyone present had ever heard. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the decorations had been carefully stored for future use, the Thompson family gathered in their living room for their first official evening as a legally recognized unit. Emma was sprawled on the floor with her dinosaur books, creating what she called a celebration timeline of all the important events that had led to Sarah joining their family. Jake was working on homework at the dining table, occasionally asking Sarah questions about mathematical concepts that she explained with patient precision. Marcus and Sarah sat together on the couch, still wearing their wedding clothes, but with shoes kicked off and ties loosened, watching their children with profound contentment. "Any regrets?" Marcus asked quietly. "About what?" "Marrying a single dad with 2 complicated kids and a dog-eared pickup truck." Sarah smiled, the expression transforming her face with warmth and joy. "Marcus, you didn't marry me despite being autistic. You married me because I'm autistic, because my differences complement your family's needs perfectly." "How so?" "Emma needs someone who understands that intense interests are gifts rather than obsessions. Jake needs someone who appreciates his emotional intelligence without expecting him to carry adult responsibilities. And you need someone who says what she means and means what she says. And what do you need?" Sarah looked around the room at her new family, taking in the comfortable chaos of homework and hobby projects, and the warm light from the fireplace that had become the center of their shared life. "I need exactly this," she said simply. "A place where my systematical thinking is valued, where my sensory needs are accommodated, where I can contribute my strengths without having to hide my challenges." Marcus kissed her temple, breathing in the subtle scent of her shampoo. "You're home, Sarah. We all are." "Yes," Sarah agreed, settling more comfortably against his shoulder. We are. Outside, the first spring butterflies were beginning to emerge from their winter chrysalises, ready to begin another season of growth and transformation. Inside, the Thompson family was beginning their own new season, built on a foundation of acceptance, understanding, and the revolutionary idea that love doesn't require anyone to change who they fundamentally are. 2 years later, Sarah Thompson stood in the wings of the Riverside Community Center, watching Emma deliver her lines in the school's production of The Secret Garden with perfect timing and genuine emotion. Emma had requested the role of Mary Lennox specifically because, as she explained to the director, Mary is autistic like me. She just didn't know it yet because this story takes place before people understood autism properly. The director had been skeptical until Emma explained her interpretation of Mary's character with such insight and systematic analysis that she'd been given the lead role immediately. Emma's performance was nuanced and compelling, bringing depth to the character that previous productions had never achieved. In the audience, Marcus sat with Jake and Dr. Martinez, all of them beaming with pride as Emma commanded the stage with confidence that would have been unimaginable 3 years earlier. Sarah had spent months working with Emma on projection techniques that accommodated her sensory sensitivities, and the result was a performance that showcased Emma's natural theatrical intelligence. During intermission, Jake leaned over to Sarah and whispered, "She's going to be famous someday." "She's going to be whatever she wants to be," Sarah replied. "That's the important thing." After the performance, as they gathered backstage to congratulate Emma, Sarah reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed since that awkward matchmaking event at the community center. Emma was thriving in middle school with accommodations that had become models for other districts. Jake had been accepted to 3 colleges with strong disability advocacy programs, planning to major in special education with a focus on autism support. Marcus had finally opened Thompson Auto Repair with Sarah's systematic business planning assistance, and the shop was thriving due to Marcus's reputation for honest work and Sarah's innovative customer service protocols. They'd hired 2 additional mechanics and were considering expansion to a second location. Sarah herself had completed certification as an autism advocate and was working part-time with Dr. Martinez's practice while maintaining her data analysis career. She'd also begun writing a blog about autism in families that had attracted national attention from other parents and autistic adults seeking resources and community. But the most significant change was intangible, the deep sense of belonging that permeated every aspect of their shared life. Sarah had found her place not by changing who she was, but by finding people who valued exactly who she'd always been. "Ready to go home?" Marcus asked as they gathered their coats and Emma's flowers. "Ready," Sarah confirmed, taking his hand and Emma's hand, with Jake walking beside them toward the parking lot. As they drove through the quiet streets of Riverside toward their house on the hill, Sarah looked out at the familiar landscape with profound gratitude. She'd found something she'd never thought possible, a love story where being different wasn't an obstacle to overcome, but the very foundation of what made their family perfect. The girl who'd once sat alone at table 12, timing conversations and cataloging rejections, had become the woman who helped other families understand that autism wasn't a limitation but simply another way of experiencing the world. And the man who'd thought his heart was too broken to love again had discovered that sometimes the most healing love comes in forms you never expected to recognize. Their story had become legendary in Riverside, told and retold as an example of what was possible when people had the courage to look past surface differences to the extraordinary compatibility underneath. But for the Thompson family, it wasn't the story at all. It was simply home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.